Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Working Differently in Extension podcast. I'm Bob Birch. So great to have you along today for our conversation with Eric Stafne. Eric's an associate extension professor with Mississippi State University Extension. And the reason we decided to invite Eric on, other than he's an interesting guy and we always like to talk to him, is a series of blog posts that Eric did for the e-extension educational technology learning network blog about the intersection of digital technology and scholarship. And this is, I think it's a really important area to discuss. It seems to come up again and again about doing extension work digitally and how it fits into the university environment and the scholarship and academia. And so we want to talk to Eric today about those things and also get your input as well. So please post your questions to the Q&A app in the Hangout on Air for any questions or comments you have for Eric. Eric Stafne, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
So let's talk a little bit about the series of blog posts. You started by defining digital scholarship, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Did you feel like maybe people in extension didn't understand fully or might have different ideas about what digital scholarship might entail?
Yeah, I thought that maybe there were different ideas about what that meant, and it may mean different things to different groups. And what I wanted to define it was something as, from my perspective, as a faculty member who is in the promotion and tenure track of being promoted, that sort of thing, and say, how does that fit into that? And so I thought it was important to define it as clearly as I possibly could to frame the discussion.
So what kind of digital scholarship have you been engaging in?
Well, it's when I first started, I worked really through e-extension, and I was the leader of the GRAPE community of practice. And we were creating a lot of content on that site, but I always was running into this roadblock of we had only a few people doing a lot of this content, and I was trying to figure out why can't we get more to do it. And so we surveyed our group, which was about 100 members, and without a doubt, the most frequent answer was, I don't know if I get credit for doing this. And so I don't want to put my time into it, whereas I know if I do something for my own state, I'm going to get credit for doing that. So, I found out through that different universities do things differently. So some of them recognize that type of work and in my view are kind of progressive in that way, and then some don't. So that's been a challenge. And so I participated in that creation of content. I've done blogging for probably about 6 or 7 years now. I do things on Twitter, I do other types of videos, and participated in podcasts like this and others. And so that's kind of what I've done. And through my experiences, I've tried to think about it more clearly as to how can I make this relatable to someone who's making a decision as to whether this is worthy or not.
So what has been the situation at your university? Has that work been recognized as part of the promotion and tenure process for you?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. When I went up for promotion from assistant to associate professor, I was told that I didn't get any credit for my blog. It's not peer reviewed, and peer review is kind of the gold standard for that. I did get credit for the work I did on e-extension, however, because it was peer reviewed. I think that over time things will change, and there's different components to be recognized more clearly in the future. At Mississippi State, we're doing a lot with social media now, and we're using blogs, we're using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of these things that I think fit into that extension component very nicely. Whether it qualifies as scholarship or not kind of depends on how it's used.
You mentioned in one of the posts about, one of the possible ways to solutions for this is to have research that shows that digital scholarship or digital work is the same level of scholarship or has that same impact as traditional, what we might consider traditional scholarship. Why do you think that's important? Do you think this will just all evolve as we all move to digital?
Well, I think it'll all evolve, but I think that if we can help that evolution go faster, and I speak from my perspective as a scientist within, the community, understanding that data and fact and experimentation and replication and all those things speak towards change or impact. And so those things, if somebody shows me the data and says, look, this person or this group of people learn 35% faster by reading, an infographic versus a traditional article, and they retain more information, they can read it faster, they like it more, then I'm likely to say, you know what, that has merit, and that is worthy of us paying more attention to and recognizing as something we should be doing. So that was my idea is, could we do something like that? And maybe we start out just doing it a little bit informally within groups and just saying, okay, this is what our theory is. If we do a little bit and find out, yeah, maybe this is worthwhile, we go farther with it with a full-blown study. But that was my idea, that by showing evidence, then we can further this a little bit better.
Do you think that, I always wonder about that. Does the evidence exist that the traditional method is working any better?
Yeah, I don't know that that's true either. I think it's just accepted that that's the way it's done, And the thing about the traditional method and the way that things like journal articles or extension publications are recognized is that it takes a lot of work to do those. It takes creativity. It takes time and effort and analysis and synthesis to get that done. And what you end up with is a product that people can say, look, this is very impressive. This has gone through all the depth and the breadth of information. It's obvious to us in the community. Whether that translates to somebody who's reading it out in the public is an entirely different thing. So we understand the creation part of it, but maybe not the impact part of it as much as we should.
That's interesting because you mentioned in one of the posts that that part of the problem, so to speak, is that many of the people on promotion and tenure committees don't have experience with how much work it does take to create digital scholarship because they haven't done it.
Correct. And but they're not going to be always on the committees. That's one of those things that as time goes on, these folks will retire and they'll come off the committees. But, I think we should be targeting them and saying, this work has as much merit as this. A has as much merit as B over here, because it takes as much time. And in some cases, it may take even more creativity than doing that. Now we have to say, they'll say, well, prove it to me, probably. And so if we can back that up in some way with metrics, is one way to do it. Surveys, those sort of things that provide that evidence.
Just want to remind everybody we're talking to Dr. Eric Stafne, Associate Extension Professor at Mississippi State University Extension. We're talking about digital scholarship in Extension, and I invite our live viewers, if you have questions for Dr. Stafne, just use the Q&A app or post a comment on the Google Plus event for this Hangout on Air, and be happy to pass those along. Eric, we were talking about peer review, and you talked a little bit about it in your blog posts as well. I guess the question is, and you brought it up in your blog post, is can we be engaged in a digital world effectively with the demand on immediate information and timeliness and relevance and context that people seem to be wanting more of, with taking the time to peer review everything?
I don't think that that's really possible. We have a hard enough time peer reviewing things now that work through the traditional system. And the reasons for that is there's maybe not enough people to go around to review it, or just the time that it takes is can be demanding sometimes, depending on what it is you're reviewing. So, and I mentioned in one of the blog posts that you can conceive of an idea for a blog post, you can write it, you can get feedback, you can look at the metrics, you can, the reach, the engagement, maybe even the impact, all in a single day, by doing that, versus a traditional extension publication where it may take weeks to write it, may take weeks to edit it and get it into the publication form. And then what happens to it after that? It's out there, but I never see any metrics or know what the impact is unless somebody comes up and said, "Oh, I read that, it was great, it helped me." Mm-hmm. So to me, it just makes sense to go and try and look for alternative ways to evaluate this type of information, because this is not delivered in the same way. And one of the things I mentioned is there post-publication peer review that could be useful. And it may in some cases, depending on the content and the way that it's delivered.
Yeah, it seems like it's sort of like a Pandora's box, I guess, a little bit for me, is if we open up digital scholarship peer review, which, like you say, we have to have some kind of peer review to make it real scholarship. Are we opening up sort of peer review requirements for everything, every comment and Facebook post and 30-second YouTube video, and what does that mean for real-time communication?
Right. No, I don't think so. There'll be targeted things that we do with that. And you could do a blog post and get that peer reviewed and on there. You might do one a month, or you don't have to do every one to count that way. As your podcast, you may not, I don't know how that would be peer reviewed necessarily. You might have a script to work from that could be peer reviewed ahead of time. But certainly the delivery of information is the key component, and it's not necessary to have everything that we do to be peer reviewed. Maybe it doesn't count as part of your outreach. Maybe it counts as part of service or some other area that we just haven't defined yet in order to bring that into our promotion, tenure, that sort of area.
In one of the posts, you said something about a new extension world order in this context of digital scholarship. And you said that the ties to rewarding research need to be severed to bring this about. Can you explain that a little bit, especially for those of us who might not be as connected to the research arm as you might be?
Well, and like I said, this is from my perspective, but everything that on the professor level that you write, the holy grail is to get a peer-reviewed or refereed journal article. And most of those things are going to be in research, whether you have a research appointment or not. So someone like myself, I have a 10% research appointment and a 90% extension appointment. The expectation is that you will do research, be it applied research of some sort, and that's what they count the most. So it's going to be that, or it's going to be, bringing in money in some way. So there's very few outlets for extension type writing, and you have to convince your peers that they're equal things. So, and they're not viewed that way. I can write one journal article on a study I did and get more credit than I can for writing a very in-depth extension publication. I may have to write 2 or 3 or 4 of those types of publications to make up for the same type of equivalency to one journal article. So I think that's unfair. That system is not fair to folks who are in extension, who are working very differently than those folks in research. And until we realize that the research world and the extension world are different, they may be parallel, but they're not. They don't run in the same way. And recognizing that research is the only way, or is better than extension type of work, is, I think, counterproductive to extension.
So how do we navigate that? I think as extension, for the last 30 plus years has been so integrated in the university. We have things like dual appointments, and like you said, you have a 10% research, and it seems like a difficult task to try and parse that out and separate it.
Yeah, I never said it was going to be easy or something that was going to be, it may never happen. But I think that discussions like this that we talk about it as people do work that shows the validity of the creativity and the synthesis of knowledge and extension, and framing it in a way that makes sense to a lot more people on these committees, that perhaps will break down some of those barriers. It may never be equivalent, but maybe there'll be more acceptance of it. There's some committees out there that don't accept things like video, or the requirement is so stringent that it's hard to get credit for it. And so, I don't know, to me, that doesn't make sense. Why are we not crediting work that has, all the validity of a publication, but has more impact? Why are we not validating that?
So what are your thoughts on sort of moving forward in terms of digital scholarship actually as extension professionals? You mentioned video, and I think you mentioned it in your blog post, and maybe sort of in a little bit of a sarcastic way about, it took us this long to get video recognized. We've been in video for, decades. And it took this long to get video recognized. What about things like, Instagram? I mean, that seems like completely out of the question. How do we move things along, not just in terms of the promotion and tenure, but just in terms of extension professionals, accepting these as valid digital scholarship and starting to pursue these delivery methods?
Well, from my perspective, and there's not really an easy answer to that, but from my perspective, it's, us in extension just have to do and create and do more and create more and work our way that way, kind of work our way from within the system to break the walls outside of this. And, I've run into people who say, I had one administrator ask me one time, do you think we should use Facebook at work? And I said, absolutely. I think it's a very valuable tool. He just kind of scoffed at me for thinking that, and but his viewpoint may have been, well, my wife uses it to communicate with the grandkids or something, and that's what they use it for. But there's so much more outside of there that I think the more that we use it and the more that we connect with each other, that amplifies our influence. And so that once we start reaching these other folks along the line, that maybe that'll become viral, so to speak, so that, there's more recognition of the work that's being done, even right now. And then it grows. We bring in more people who are doing more things that are more, exciting. We have more podcasts like this one. I think we have more webinars. We have more whatever else is the next thing down the line. We don't know, but it's coming so fast that we have to latch onto it. And if we don't do it now, we get left behind. And I think that we're behind now in terms of within extension of using this digital technology, but we do the best we can, and we need everybody to participate.
In the last post in the series, you called for a recommended plan of action for universities, to deal with digital scholarship. If you got carte blanche, what kinds of things would be in your plan of action for universities looking at digital scholarship?
Well, I think that the first thing we do is we'd have to sit down and look at the technologies that are being used right now, and look at some of those that are maybe fringe things that could be used, and decide from there, this is how you use this, or how it's being used. Is it scholarship, or is it communication, or what? Just how is it? We need to define things. Like you said, I defined digital scholarship so I could frame the discussion. If we define each of these things underneath digital scholarship, that helps frame the discussion of how to go forward. And so you look at Facebook or Twitter and say, okay, this is how it's being used. Is that the most efficient way? Is there some other way that we could use it better, that maybe is more scholarly, or do we just consider it service to the university, but using it for, we're promoting the university, we're answering questions on there, all of those sort of things. So, a lot of it is defining what we're using and how we want to use it. So that's one thing that I would do. And if we had opportunities to talk to promotion and tenure committees and say, okay, what are your hangups about it? And that would be really good as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of hangups, a lot of saying, well, how do we know that this is effective? And there's a lot of work to be done here, but as far as going forward, I think we need to ask a lot of questions. I think we need to, but also give some evidence of what's been done so far and some of the impact it's had, whether it's determined as scholarly or not at this point.
So we got a question from a live viewer here. Jennifer Alexander would like to know if you have any ideas for how extension faculty and communication professionals within extension services or universities, I suppose, can better work together to move this idea ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we really need to do that. If I give that question from my perspective, look at it from my perspective, faculty and the communications need to work a little bit closer together. We have good relationships, but the staffing is a problem. There may not be enough to go around. They're working on some story, and they may not be able to get around to you for a while, just because of scheduling. And so perhaps on the faculty side, I need to feed them more ideas and say, here's what I'm doing. and here's like what I'd like to get out of it. And from their side, maybe if they're paying attention to who's using social media within the university, or who's seems to be technologically savvy at some point, say, why don't we do this or try this? We want to have some more interaction in that way. I think once we start building those relationships, we're going to get much better outcomes from that.
Yeah, and from, I get my side of it is the communication side for anybody who didn't know. So I think you're right on, Eric. And one of the things that as communication professionals that I think we need to do is in Eric, you sort of mentioned this in terms of knowing who's doing what. Look for those targets of opportunities. I think in my organization sometimes we look maybe too broadly and are thinking all extension professionals should know how to do this or know how to do that, and we're in a training mode instead of being in that consultant sort of helping mode where we identify, if you have an Eric Stafne on your extension service staff doing stuff like this, get in touch with them and figure out what, as a communication professional, you could do to help him be even more effective. Maybe instead of spending time trying to convince someone who's not ready to be convinced.
I think that's a really good point. If we start recognizing the needs of each other, and some of these, and that's just not the way that we've worked in the past, necessarily. Kind of, I do my thing, y'all do your thing. If it intersects somewhere down the line, then great. But if not, we've got plenty of stories to tell. But maybe it's more actively engaging with each other, I think, is the key.
Thanks for that question, Jennifer. Paul Hill has joined us from the Educational Technology Learning Network, as he has for the last few podcasts, and hopefully will continue to do, to talk a little bit about what's going on with EdTech. And I believe there's a Twitter chat coming up Thursday. Is that right, Paul, or do I have my dates messed up?
No, you are correct. At 2 p.m. this Thursday, Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be talking about LinkedIn, putting your best cyber foot forward, and professionalism online. And it will be a great tweet up. We expect a lot of people there. And we just had some presentations. I wasn't there, but at NetC, the National E-Extension Technology Conference, I think that's what it is. Were you there?
I was not there, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I believe Jamie presented and had some co-presenters, and they spoke a lot about the Learning Network. I got a lot of tweets just this week about people excited about the Learning Network, hearing about it for the first time, and we're excited that hopefully that they'll join us.
Yeah, so be sure and tune in for that on Thursday. The hashtag is EdTechLN. So what's new, Paul? You mentioned NetC. I don't know if anything new came out of that. I got your invitation for the Maker Movement community. What else is new going on with you?
Oh, with me, yeah, I've been working on my E-Extension Fellowship on the Maker community. There is an E-Extension Innovation Partners meeting in Indianapolis, Indiana, next month, and so I'm looking to go there, present, talk about it with partners, and then we're also talking about opportunities with the Maker Movement and E-Extension at the National Association of 4-H Agents, as well as the FCS Association. So a lot of presentations coming up. I believe I'm presenting, or hoping to present. We're working on submissions to the NAESD-PD conference in San Diego in December. So we're excited to do that and meet new people and grow the network. And it's great to follow the hashtag. If you're interested in the network or not quite sure about it, just search the hashtag on Twitter and watch for the various conversations. Follow them, join in, lurk a little bit, but definitely join in and learn.
And Eric, what's next for you? What do you have on the horizon, or new things that you're working on?
Well, I'm working with Paul on the guiding committee, and it's very exciting to be part of that. I think the group is very dynamic, and it's exciting. So I'm just looking forward to being part of that and contributing where I can. And it's digital technology, and that's not my forte. I'm a fruit scientist, so I just do my best to contribute when I can.
Well, Eric, I want to thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast. I want to encourage everybody to go out and read those blog posts if you didn't get a chance to. It's the title of the series is called The Intersection of Digital Technology and Scholarship. You can find it on the eXtension Educational Technology blog at www.extedtechs.org, or just search Eric Stafne Digital Scholarship and it'll come up in Google. Worked for me. So hopefully it'll work for you. Thanks again for joining us for the Working Differently in Extension podcast. I want to remind you that you can find past episodes of the podcast in a couple of places. Check out www.ag.ndsu.edu/workingdifferently and click on the Working Differently in Extension podcast logo, or find us on SoundCloud. It's soundcloud.com/workingdifferently. Coming up in a week, we're going to be talking to Jeff Reisdorfer about a new website that he's been involved in called farmanswers.org, and about his podcast as well. So join us on August 24th, another live Working Differently in Extension podcast, 1:30 p.m. Central Time. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, everybody, for joining us, and have a great day.